James Comey would spy on the Trump campaign on fake Russia charges all over again, knowing what he knows now. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about former disgraced, fired FBI Director James Comey, and the fact that I don't think he has any remorse. He says he was wrong, but he's really still defending the spying on the Trump campaign in 2016 on these fallacious, bogus charges that President Trump and his campaign were Russian agents, that they had coordinated with Russia on the DNC and John Podesta hacks and putting the emails onto WikiLeaks, that this was used to obtain Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act spying warrants against the Trump campaign. Carter Page, his contacts in the campaign and elsewhere, and giving the Justice Department and intelligence agencies unprecedented access to presidential campaign emails, text messages, phone calls, and other documents. Basically, the Obama administration was spying on the Trump campaign, the opposition party, in an election year in an unprecedented abuse of power. I don't think FISA has ever been used this way before. And it's basically a really dark day for the Justice Department. And FISA renewal is coming up in March. And it might not get renewed now because it's supposed to be helping to stop terrorism, not to spy on political campaigns. And yet this is how it was used. And now we know from the Horowitz report that the FBI knew as early as January 2017 that Christopher Steele, who was hired by the Democrats, DNC, the Hillary Clinton campaign, he's a former British spy, and he had alleged that Trump was this bought and paid for Russian agent. Well, his primary subsource was saying quite the opposite, that the information he had was hearsay, that he heard it at a bar from someone, that his own subsources didn't have direct access to these supposed Kremlin insiders and Russian foreign ministry officials and so forth, that Steele had claimed in the dossier that was. And this was used to get the Steele dossier. These bogus allegations were used to get the FISA warrant on the Trump campaign. And it was ultimately debunked by Robert Mueller, special counsel, who found that there was no conspiracy between Trump, his campaign, and Russia to hack the DNC or Podesta emails and put them onto WikiLeaks. Instead, he found that if anything, there was the evidence wasn't there. Trump wasn't a Russian agent. Paul Manafort wasn't a Russian agent. George Papadopoulos, Carter Page, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn. None of these people were brought up on charges that they were Russian agents or that they had anything to do with the DNC and John Podesta email hacks and putting them on to WikiLeaks. It was all made up. And but here's the kicker: they didn't seek out the Steele subsource until after Buzzfeed had published the Steele dossier on January 10th, 2017. And the dossier was debunked almost immediately, primarily because Trump's then a personal attorney, Michael Cohen, said, hey, take a look at my passport. I've never been to Prague. I've never been to the Czech Republic. So I very well couldn't have been there meeting with Russian agents, mopping up the supposed fallout of the WikiLeaks disclosures of the DNC emails. And so not only was he not in Prague, he couldn't have been ever have been speaking to Russian agents, meaning whoever put that into the Steele dossier, they were making it up. It was a fiction. Was that Steele? Was that his subsource? The Inspector General report doesn't get too much into the details about the Prague aspect of it and Michael Cohen, because so far as we know, that wasn't actually included in the FISA warrant application. But did they know that Steele had reported that Cohen was in Prague and they knew it wasn't true? Well, according to Jake Tapper on January 11th on CNN, that may be so. They may have known as early as January of 2017 that the whole Michael Cohen thing was fake and that it was an unreliable report.
Because Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, has been out there because in this uncorroborated report, it talks about Michael Cohen, Trump's official corporate lawyer, making a trip to the Czech Republic. My reporting suggests that people did try to run that down.
They did.
And they concluded that it was a different Michael Cohen. It was a Michael Cohen with a passport from another country, the same birth year, different birth date. So for Michael Cohen to dispute that he was in the Czech Republic completely confirms with and comports with our reporting. And it's one of the reasons why the intelligence chiefs did not get specific with these allegations. And that's why I hope at the press conference today, people are more general and don't get into the specifics, because a lot of that stuff just has not been proven.
And so that should have been a really big warning right there. Donald Trump at that point has not been sworn into office. They knew that the Michael Cohen aspect of the Steele dossier was not panning out. And then days after the Buzzfeed thing is published, that's when they basically interviewed the Steele Subsource. And so so the FISA warrant was renewed on January 12th and January 13th. So 2 days after Buzzfeed publishes the dossier on January 10th, they're going back for the FISA renewal, even though they know that there's a huge problem, a big gaping hole in Steele's reporting. And this was well known in mainstream news circles at the time and amongst law enforcement and the intelligence agencies, that Steele's reporting was simply not reliable. And then they go and interview the subsource, the primary subsource, and they find that he is basically contradicting everything Steele had reported, that it was all hearsay. He heard about some of these allegations in a bar, that the subsource's own subsources, who Steele was relying upon for his reporting, they didn't have firsthand information either, and they knew someone who knew someone that was conveying this information that probably was all BS. It was all bogus. It was false. It was just stuff that they were giving Steele what he was asking for. Oh, give me dirt on Trump. So they come back with, oh yeah, Trump's a Russian agent. Oh yeah, we can find him from somebody that'll say that. And they found it, or they just made it up. They inserted it into the dossier, and then that was fed into the FISA warrant aspects of it. And it was the thing that put it over the top. It was an essential part, per the Horowitz report, of the allegations and getting the FISA warrant. It convinced the lawyers at the Justice Department that they needed to proceed with spying on the presidential campaign in an election year, but they knew as early as January 17, 2017, that it was all bogus. From the Horowitz report, quote, the FBI's interview with Steele's primary subsource in January 2017, shortly after the FBI filed the Carter Page FISA Renewal Application No. 1 and months prior to Renewal Application No. 2, raised doubts about the reliability of Steele's descriptions of information in his election reports. Now, the FISA warrant was initially taken out on October 21, 2016, with 90 days for renewal. The renewal application was put in January 12th, which is after 2017, after the Buzzfeed has published the Steele dossier. And that may be what caused them to do it, because it was well known that, Steele has this big problem with reporting. Hey, maybe we should go check out Steele's sources. And so Michael Cohen posed a huge problem for all of this. And I think that, and I was saying as soon as it was published, I said, well, what about this Michael Cohen thing? If Steele's sources are making up the fact that people are traveling to foreign countries that they never traveled to and talking to people who they couldn't possibly have met, well, then much of the sourcing for the Steele dossier would probably have similar problems for it. And it turns out I was absolutely right about that. The Mueller report absolutely vindicated that skeptical approach to the Steele dossier. They should have never gotten spying warrants in the first place. Just don't bring that up to James Comey, because he still thinks that, they had there were reasons to go ahead with that besides the Steele dossier. It was just a part of the case that was made, not the tipping point. It was the tipping point. Without the Steele dossier, they don't get the FISA warrant, and none of this actually happens. I think we're in a totally different, trajectory of history. Instead, they've shined a really bright light on the FISA process, and now FISA renewal is coming up in March, and it might not get approved, and maybe it shouldn't, because if it's going to be used for political spying, they're not protecting us from terrorism with FISA. If they're spying on the Trump campaign in 2016 on made-up charges, they're serving political designs of power players in Washington. That's not what FISA is supposed to be there for. Now, Steele had been hired by the DNC in the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 via Fusion GPS and law firm Perkins Coie to produce the bogus allegations against Trump. The FBI relied on the Steele dossier, with Horowitz finding that, quote, receipt of Steele's election reporting on September 19, 2016 played a central and essential role in the FBI's and department's decision to seek the FISA order. But thanks to Buzzfeed, there was a reason to suddenly question Steele's allegations and his sources. Because in addition to falsely accusing Trump and his campaign, including Paul Manafort and Carter Page, of being Russian agents, they had claimed that Michael Cohen had traveled to Prague, but Cohen had never been to Prague. Now, the same allegation was discredited in Robert Mueller's report that just came out a few months ago, and it stated that, quote, Cohen had never traveled to Prague. When Cohen was called to testify before Congress in February, he repeated it. He said, quote, I've never been to Prague. I've never been to the Czech Republic. In May of 2017, again, this is before the final renewal, Cohen was showing everyone who would listen his passport, saying, look, I've never been to Czech Republic. And they show pictures of it and all of the places he had been to in Italy, out of Italy, and so forth. Thanksgiving in the UK, visiting the Republic of Georgia. There were lots of places he had been to, Scotland and more, Caribbean vacations, a visa to Turkey, Macau, and Hong Kong. But no Czech Republic. And so that should have been a big red flag. It was raised at the time in January 2017 with this reporting. Again, Jake Tapper, he knew that the Steele dossier had major problems with the reporting there. And it probably shouldn't have been used for a FISA warrant, but it was. And so that's the reality. James Comey really screwed up. They should have demanded that they speak to Steele's primary subsource before they ever sought the spying, and they might have found these contradictions. But it doesn't sound like Comey's really that remorseful about what happened. And we know that because even through this process, the FBI had information that it was shielding from the top brass at the Justice Department, and maybe even Comey himself, according to then National Security Division Deputy Assistant Attorney General Stuart Evans, had Office of, and this is from the Horowitz report, had the Office of Intelligence been made aware of the information about the primary subsource contradicting Steele's claims, well, the renewal request would have been foregone, at least until the FBI reconciled the differences between Steele's account and the primary subsource's account to the satisfaction of the Office of Intelligence. But the FBI never sent any of the exculpatory information proving Trump and his campaign's innocence. And I mean, that's just a travesty of justice, I think, that this would happen in America, that you could have this type of spying going on, and then they have information that proves that the presidential campaign, the Trump campaign, the transition, and then the Trump administration, president's been elected. He's about to be sworn into office. He's innocent, but we should tell someone. No, we're going to keep that from the National Security Division. They don't tell FBI Director James Comey, according to Comey. Instead, the FBI made it sound like the subsource in its subsequent filings that the subsource had substantiated Steele when he had contradicted Steele. Quote, the FBI offered only a brief conclusory statement that the FBI met with the primary subsource, quote, in an effort to further corroborate Steele's reporting, and found the primary subsource to be, quote, truthful and cooperative. Yeah, about the fact that Steele was lying. We believe that including this statement without also informing OI and the court that the primary subsource's account of events contradicted key assertions in Steele's reporting left a misimpression that the primary subsource had corroborated Steele's reporting, and it had not. And so now James Comey, he went on Fox News Sunday. He's speaking with Chris Wallace, and I think Chris Wallace just tore Comey to pieces on this. It was a great interview. And so he acknowledged that the subsource interview did not occur until after BuzzFeed had published the dossier. And so he says, quote, but that doesn't derive a conclusion that Steele's reporting is bunk. I mean, there's a number of tricky things to that. First, you're interviewing the subsource after all the reporting has become public. And so as a counterintelligence investigator, you have to think, is he walking away from it because now it's public? This is when it blew up and when it was published by whatever outfit is, BuzzFeed. It was all over the news and it had become a big deal. But Comey says he had no idea that the Subsource had contradicted Steele, saying, quote, "As the director, you're not kept informed on the details of an investigation, so no, in general, I didn't know that they'd learned from what they'd learned from the Subsource. I didn't know the particulars of the investigation." He's the FBI director. They're spying on a presidential campaign. They're about to carry on a top secret investigation over into the Trump administration, lie to the president about it so they can carry on their surveillance and try to catch them in some sort of lie. So you can say, oh, he's obstructing justice or something like that. And he didn't think that he needed to check the details. Let's make sure we interview the sources that Steele is relying upon. No, they just took it all on faith. He read the FISA warrant once. He said, "Oh, yep, Steele says Trump's a Russian agent. Well, must be true. Let's go get some spying on a presidential campaign. No big deal. I don't need to check up on it." You can't make this stuff up. This had to be a conscious decision. If not by Comey, then by somebody in the government to cover up the primary subsource's contradictory statements of Steele. The Buzzfeed publication of the dossier was a game changer. They said, oh, we got to go out and corroborate this. We're in trouble because it looks like Steele might have been lying. Instead, they went out and confirmed that Steele was lying. Or that the dossier was false and that they needed to do a correction, a course correction. Instead, they went headlong into it. They forced Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. They got the special counsel, Robert Mueller, and the rest is history. It's a total disgrace for the Justice Department and the intelligence agencies, and now FISA renewals in jeopardy. Good job, guys. It's not like you weren't warned that this would happen, but you were warned. And so, what are we supposed to do? Rescue you now and make it pretend like Trump's a Russian agent just so you guys can save some face? How about you guys get disgraced? You guys get fired. You guys get prosecuted, and President Trump can go get reelected because he deserves it. And he's done a good job, and maybe he'll finally rein in this deep state, this FISA application nonsense, where basically the government can spy on anyone it wants on the thinnest of reeds, on the slimmest of suspicions. I think that this basically this kind of warrant process is just a rubber stamp. FISA court is a joke. They're not. They don't seem particularly angry about this. Or if they have done some filings that are top secret, those should be declassified. Because I want to know what little slap on the wrist the Justice Department got from illegally spying on a presidential campaign on false allegations that they were Russian agents. A good question is, why didn't Comey order the allegations to be verified by checking on the sources before he signed the FISA warrant? And whoever ordered the sources to be interviewed, why did that not take place until after BuzzFeed had published? Were they waiting for? And still, the FISA application that depended on Steele's erroneous reporting would be renewed again in April and June of 2017. But the FBI had every reason to drop the case and report up the food chain that it was based on fake gossip as early as January 2017, before Trump was even sworn into office. The government was warned publicly at the time just how wrong they were. And it went ahead and continued to do bogus surveillance anyways, carrying a top secret investigation against the then president-elect into his new administration. Comey lied to Trump about the extent of the investigation, and that's why he was fired. He should have been fired. And maybe he should be prosecuted, or somebody at the Justice Department. Whoever was concealing this information from the leadership at the Justice Department. Was Jeff Sessions ever made aware of this before he was forced to recuse himself? I don't think so. I think that this whole thing stinks to high heaven. This was some sort of coup. This was an act of war against the Constitution and the American people to overturn the result of the 2016 election. It's absolutely outrageous. That's why Attorney General William Barr and U.S. Attorney John Durham, they've got to get to the bottom of this, because if nobody's held accountable for this, this is going to happen again. And so we're just going to have to just do away with FISA and accept whatever danger that puts our national security in if this is not going to be reined in. I'd say that a few rotten apples at the FBI or the Justice Department or intelligence agencies, just have them fired, let them be prosecuted. They're expendable compared to, protecting national security. They're expendable compared to preserving the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment and ensuring that suspicionless spying is not going on or that phony allegations can be used. They should be corroborating sources. There should be no more non-witness statements to spy on the American people or on presidential campaigns or any campaign. There should, if there's a valid valid intelligence purpose for any of this? I can't find it, and nobody's making that case. James Comey, he cannot make a case for how this made America safer. This has put our the very surveillance powers the FBI says it depends on in jeopardy of not being renewed. So Comey, he's the one who's jeopardizing national security, and he should have to answer for that. The Justice Department should have to answer for that. The intelligence agencies should have to answer for that. This is why we had a church committee in the 1970s. And this is why the FISA statute was adopted. But if it's just going to be used to authorize more political spying, then we don't need FISA, and we should just get rid of it because it's not making us safer. It's actually making the intelligence agencies and the Justice Department too powerful to bring up phony allegations against their political opponents and try to engage in coups and overturn election results. This is just disgusting. And I'm so fed up with these people, and this can never be allowed to happen again. And I'll leave you with the close here. But now we know, according to Comey, true believer that he is that he would do this all again. He would spy on the Trump campaign again, all over again, based upon what he knows now. He thinks he just forgot to include a few footnotes. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.